So today is 17th of March 2024. The workshop on Quest, the Quantum Enabled Science and Technology Theme 1 ended. And one of the highlights of the workshop was that Professor N. Mukunda, an eminent physicist of this country, who also is my PhD supervisor, I worked with him at Bangalore during 1991 and 1997 for my PhD, is here, and we have decided to record some conversations with him. So Professor Mukunda, first of all, welcome to Punjabi University. I think this is your second visit. You came for the Science Congress many years ago, you once told me. But after in these years, this is your first visit. So welcome to the university.
Thank you very much.
And today what we thought was that we'll ask you about your own trajectory. So why don't we begin from the very beginning, that where was your schooling and so on?
Yeah, my father used to work in the old British government before independence, and so he was transferred from place to place. So I had my earliest schooling was in Trivandrum in Kerala, then in Bangalore for a year at the time of independence. Then I came to Delhi and I was a student in St. Columba's High School, not far from Central Secretariat. Then he was transferred to Hyderabad for 4 years, so I shifted there. I finished my schooling in Hyderabad. It was a senior Cambridge. In those days there was something called higher secondary, 9th and then 10th, 11th, something like that. And normally one was eligible to enter college after higher secondary. But because the course I took was senior Cambridge, Delhi University was one of the few universities in the country which would accept students for undergraduate admission after senior Cambridge. So this is how I ended up as a student at St. Stephen's College in Delhi.
What subjects did you choose when you came to the college?
When I originally wanted to be a student of physics. I wanted to enroll for BSc Honours Physics, but they said that you have only taken general science in senior Cambridge, not more substantial course in science. So I was given admission to mathematics honours with the subsidiary subjects were physics and chemistry. Okay. And that was in the year 55, 70, almost 70 years.
You mean even when you joined college, although you did mathematics honours, you knew that you were moving in the direction of physics?
I did not know that at that time. The situation was that I had wanted to study, be a physics student, but for the reason I just explained, that was not allowed. So I took physics as a subsidiary, and those times are very different, the opportunities for further study. So when I finished my mathematics honours from Delhi University through St. Stephen's College 1958, we used to listen to our parents much more at that time. We were not that independent, and my father told me, you have 3 options. One is you try to enter the civil services like IAS. Second possibility, you take up law. And the third is continue in physics. I enrolled for masters in mathematics at Delhi University.
Okay, after your BSc.
After the BSc honours through St. Stephen's College, I started attending classes in mathematics masters, MA. That was directly under the university, not through a college. That's what I recall. In that period, there was an important event which occurred in the country in the area of science development, the establishment of the training schools of the atomic energy program in Bombay. This is something which Homi Bhabha started in 1957, and that was the year the first batch of the so-called training school was selected. Roughly 40 or 50 students in physics, similar number in chemistry, and then in engineering sciences were brought together for 1 year very intensive training, and that was done in Bombay, as it was then called. And then at the end of the year you would be absorbed in one of the divisions of the atomic energy establishment. It was not called BARC at that time, it was AEET, Atomic Energy Establishment Trombay. So it turned out I applied for the second batch of this training school program in 1958, even though I did not have a science degree. And there was no such thing as a mathematics stream in the training program, but I applied in the physics stream. Whatever the reasons, I was accepted because I had done physics as a subsidiary subject. And so I entered the training school. That is where my change from a mathematics major to a physics student happened. So it was a crash course, 1958 to 59, where I had to learn all the physics which I had missed at school, and I had taken it only as a subsidiary subject in college.
So what was your experience in the training school? Who were your teachers, or what were the highlights?
Yeah. So this is an establishment of the training school is a very important event in Indian scientific world at that time, because Bhabha wanted to train lot of young people to man the various aspects of atomic energy program. And as I said, in each batch, my batch for example, there were about 40 to 50 physicists, equal number of chemists, and then engineering, electrical, metallurgical, chemical, all the subjects were there. For us, the 1 year program was very, very intense. I should mention some of the names many people should know, people who passed through that training school program. V.S. Arunachalam, who was the defense science advisor, who passed away recently. He was my class fellow. G. Rajashekaran, a very well-known particle physicist of the country, who also passed away last year. He was in the first batch. Professor Ajay Sood, principal scientific advisor today, he is from a later batch. So these are, and Professor Dr. Kakodkar, who was chairman of Atomic Energy Establishment, he is also from one of the batches of the training school. So in that 1 year, you won't believe, in an 11 to 12 month period, we were taught about 40 different subjects. In my case, the majority of the subjects were physics and some amount of mathematics, and apart from some electronic lab and so on, we had to go through courses of health physics, reactor physics, so many things of interest to the atomic energy program. So I remember we had a course lasting for 2 to 3 weeks, and then a final exam in that course. It was that intense. About 40 different subjects being taught in 1 year. And most of the teachers, many of them in physics certainly and mathematics, were faculty, senior people from the TIFR. And for reactor physics, people from the reactor physics division within the atomic energy establishment. So I went through a quality of teaching which was really remarkable.
Any names you remember from your teachers?
Yeah, I remember so many. Professor M.G.K. Menon.
Okay.
So one sad thing is that at that time, Bhabha was overall running the Department of Atomic Energy, but he did not have time to teach us. If only he had found the time to teach us at least a little bit, I feel that is 60, 70 years ago, it would have made a lasting impression and impact, but it didn't happen. So Professor Menon, Professor Daniel, a great cosmic ray physicist, Professor R. Narasimhan, who was the person who set up the computer science activity in TIFR, he was one of our teachers. I remember he taught us probability theory. Then, so many of them were practicing research scientists, physicists in the Tata Institute and in the atomic energy, and they would come and teach. Udgaonkar, he taught me quantum mechanics, non-relativistic. S.N. Biswas, he taught us relativistic quantum mechanics. So it was like that.
And then after the training school got over, what did you do?
So it's a funny story. My exposure to physics was as a subsidiary subject in undergraduate science, and it is funny thing, it happened that I was accepted as a physics trainee in this training school, right? So I knew some mathematics compared to my other fellow students, but not that much. And then I learnt all my physics in that 1 year. And at the end of that 1 year, it turned out I was at top of the list in physics. So for the top 2, 3, 4 people, the atomic energy, the people who were running this program, Dr. Raja Ramanna was the chief person. They would have a committee, and after the final results were announced, we went to meet the committee. For the top 4, 3, 4, 5 ranks, we were told, you choose what you want to do. You will not be assigned to this or that division of atomic energy. You can choose. Some of us chose to work in TIFR, and I will tell you some of those names. I chose to work in TIFR. One, Professor Rajat Bhaduri, a very well-known nuclear theory person, very versatile person, who later migrated to Canada, and he lived all his life in McMaster University in Hamilton in Ontario. He also passed away a couple of years ago, but he was one of my fellow students who opted for TIFR. And then you must have heard of Professor Divakaran.
Yes. Yeah.
He also chose to go to TIFR. So a few of us were given the opportunity to choose where we would like to go. We selected TIFR. That's how I became a TIFR student. The rest who were not given this free option, they were assigned to different groups within the atomic energy establishment, either health physics or reactor physics or neutron physics, the different divisions.
And this was as a job or as a, what was the status?
The status, the 1 year of training student, training school experience, we were called some junior something or other, junior some assistant, I don't even remember the title. But at the end of successfully completing that 1 year's training, we got actual full permanent positions, junior scientific officer.
At TIFR?
No.
Wherever you went.
See, mine was complicated, unusual again. I opted to go to TIFR. My fellow students who did so, like Bhaduri, Divakaran and others, they became completely TIFR students, fully TIFR. But in my case, if I may say it at a personal level, I was being mentored and advised by Dr. Ramanna. So he told me, you go and work in TIFR, but remain on the roles of atomic energy. So I was a junior scientific officer of atomic energy establishment Trombay, but working, sort of placed in TIFR. So that's how it worked.
And TIFR, what was, how did you start? What were you doing?
So this started in around August 1959 that I joined TIFR.
And you were quite young at that time, I mean.
I was just over 20.
Okay.
Just over. So in those days, TIFR, the main building in Kolaba, had not yet, it was under construction. When we joined TIFR as research students, we were working in the old yacht club. That's the one near the Gateway of India, near Taj Mahal Hotel. So we all used to sit in the main library and spend the whole day studying at desks in the library. And it was a very unusual situation in the sense, it was not like a college atmosphere. It was not that there were regular classes which we had to attend. We were given freedom to do whatever reading we wished to pursue. At least I was given that freedom. A few of my fellow students, they very quickly got attached to one of the working research scientists. I give an example. Rajashekharan started research level work with Professor Biswas. He was 1 year senior to me. Rajat Bhaduri, my contemporary, he started working in nuclear theory with Professor Kailash Kumar, who was a faculty member of TIFR. In my case, I was told by Professor L.K. Pandit and S.N. Biswas, you do whatever reading you like to do. It turned out I just picked up a few books I decided to study at great depth, and they just told me, anytime you want to come and talk to us and discuss what you are reading, we are always available. So it is it has been a good thing for me, but also some disadvantage, in the sense that my period in TIFR became somewhat diffuse. I did not get started in any research level problem that quickly.
But what caught your fancy in those days, since you were free to choose? And
yeah, so let me just say that first of all, Rajshekharan did write research level papers in that corresponding period, working with Professor Biswas. I think he worked on hypernuclei or separable potentials for hypernuclei, but something technical, and so he got introduced to research level way of thinking and working. The same thing happened with Bhaduri. I remember these two very well. He started working in nuclear theory, many-body theory, and so on. In my case, I was given this freedom, and I had come in with a mathematical bent of mind. I must say, because it is so many years ago, the level of mathematics that I had been taught or exposed to in Delhi was reasonable, moderately good, but not really very high. I can say that in those days, some of the colleges in Madras, Chennai, they had better mathematics training compared to what I got in Delhi, when I look at the subjects I studied and the subjects they studied. Similarly, the mathematics training in ISI Calcutta, my impression has been it was of a higher level than mine. But anyway, I had a slight mathematical bias, so I picked up two books, and I consulted Professor Pandit and Biswas and said, is it all right if I spend my time learning the subject from these two books? One was The Principles of Quantum Mechanics by Dirac, and the second was The Theory of Groups and Quantum Mechanics by Hermann Weyl. So they said, sure, go ahead, and whenever you want, come and talk to us, we will discuss. So it was not only me, 3 or 4 of us, all of us started going through the Dirac book on quantum mechanics, day after day, sitting in the library at a desk and working through that book. And we would discuss among ourselves, and then also with Pandit or Biswas.
And then later on, of course, you moved to Rochester to do a PhD and all that.
So this was in 1959. Sometime in 1960, I think, the buildings, the permanent TIFR buildings at Colaba started nearing completion. So we were given room to work in Colaba. So we started commuting every day, going and working, doing our reading or whatever it is in Colaba. In that period, late 1960, because of family reasons, I got permission to apply for PhD study at the University of Rochester in the US. I actually applied to 2 or 3 universities. One was Maryland, the other was Rochester. And I was selected at both places. Somehow I was so inexperienced, I didn't even reply to the letter from Maryland. I just accepted the offer from Rochester. There was a reason for that. That is someone we all admired as students. That was George Sudarshan. He had become so famous. He had been in TIFR a few years before us. In 1955, he had gone to Rochester as a student. And then he worked with the Marshak and did his most famous work, the V minus A theory of weak interactions. So for all of us, myself and my fellow students, he was a kind of inspiration. And it turned out that by various reasons, there was some kind of family, not connection, but friendship. He was married into a family from Bangalore, and we are from Bangalore. And my father knew that. So these things happen. So, and Dr. Ramana knew George Sudarshan very well, because Sudarshan had been a student in TIFR. So Ramana wrote to Sudarshan and said that so and so is applying and he will do very well and all that kind of thing. So I got admission there, but there was some mishap. I'm telling you this partly for amusement. I did not know in those days that when you send a letter by airmail from the post office in India, you must make sure, because you put a lot of stamps, 15 rupees, 20 rupees in those days, you must make sure the letter, the postmark is stamped in your presence.
Otherwise, somebody may remove the stamps.
In fact, that happened. Now, I didn't know I have to take this precaution. So I just sent the necessary documents, sent everything, and I thought everything is working out all right. And then it turned out messages came from Professor Sudarshan to Ramana. Your student, we are not getting any of his papers, none of his documents are reaching us. Then I was told, this is what has happened, you should have taken care at the post office. So anyway, I sent a second set of documents with proper stamping. For that reason, I could not go to Rochester in September 1960. I ended up there in January 61. So I had spent a year and a half as a student in TIFR. Unfortunately, no research experience for the reason I described, but I had spent my time usefully reading these two classes.
So in Rochester, did you start with the regular graduate school, or?
Yes. I should have joined in September 1960. I had lost one term for this reason. Then as soon as I reached in January 1961, I started with the graduate courses, first year courses being given in that semester. And then after 3 months or so, I had to appear for master's qualifying.
So in some sense, that was your first exposure to a very proper, regular classroom teaching of courses in physics and so on.
Physics, definitely.
So how did you like the graduate school program at Rochester?
Wonderful. It was wonderful. Because it was very new experience for me, and I had done this amount of reading, so I was familiar with quite a few advanced, sophisticated things, but it turned out the quality of the teaching was, for me, really remarkable. Some of the people who taught me, Emil Wolf, the great optics teacher, he was the man who was teaching methods of mathematical physics. The first course on mathematical physics I took was from a very famous nuclear theory person, Professor James French. He, by the way, was very well known to Indian people. Professor S.P. Pandya, who used to be in PRL, he was French's student. Professor Ram Bansal of PU Chandigarh was French's student, so he's very well known. And Jiten Parikh, who used to be in PRL, J.C. Parikh, was a very close associate of French. So I got my first proper course in mathematical physics from French, followed by a course by Emil Wolf.
And the graduate school must be having all the other courses like classical mechanics, quantum mechanics.
Yeah, all of those things were there. So I wouldn't say that all the teachers were very great. Some of the quantum mechanics teachers, see, that's the way it is. An experimental physics professor would be asked to teach the quantum mechanics course, and I could tell that the quality was not that good, but they didn't.
So did you start working with Sudarshan during the coursework or after you finished?
So I had to take the PhD qualifying exam. That was in May 1962. That roughly 1.5 years I had to take courses. There was a certain minimum requirement. Total, I don't know, 36 credits or some such number. So I had to complete that. One person who came as a visiting professor from Israel, he was, I think, a cosmic ray experimentalist. One professor, Gideon Yekutieli, he came to teach at Rochester, and he was asked to teach a course in advanced quantum mechanics. And it turned out that was such a superb course. And along with it, there was another great nuclear theorist by the name Malcolm Macfarlane, and he gave a course on the rotation group and so on. these things were appealing to me very much. So I finished all that, finished the coursework and the qualifying exam in May 62. Then I went to Sudarshan and said, will you accept me as your student? And he did so. So that is when I started formally associated with him.
So how was it working with Sudarshan? Did he put you on a problem, or was it one track, or you did many things during PhD?
In retrospect, I should say that he treated me too leniently. He did not sort of put my nose to the grindstone. I can imagine if I had chosen to work with Professor Marshak and he would have accepted me, Marshak would have chosen some problem, maybe not a very, very great problem, but a substantial problem, and said, you do this. But Sudarshan left it very loose. He said, he allowed me to play around. At that time it was very pleasant, but I think more disciplined control from him would have been to my benefit. So that is how it.
So what were the things you did in PhD roughly?
So first thing is, he himself had given a very unusual course in classical mechanics to the students 1 year ahead of me. That was in 1961, I think he did that. He patterned it after ideas from Lie groups and Lie algebras, and I think to some extent he was inspired by the work of Julian Schwinger at Harvard. Sudarshan had been working with Schwinger after his own PhD. So for summer of 61 or something like that, for my fellowship money, I was asked to write out the lecture notes of his lectures on classical mechanics. So that caught my interest and my fancy, you can say. So I started thinking, and in that way, the structure of Hamiltonian mechanics, the close connections to group theory, Lie groups, Lie algebras, and so on. So slowly, of course, the overall area was going to be elementary particle physics. That was the area in which Marshak was working, Sudarshan, Okubo, all three of them. There was a chance I could have gone to work with Wolf in classical optics. My fellow student, Professor Chandralal Mehta, he and I reached Rochester at the same time. He joined Wolf as a PhD student well before me. So his PhD work also progressed much faster. I think Wolf gave him more precise guidance, what to do, how to do it, and so on. I did not have that kind of close guidance from Sudarshan. I think his style was very different. He gave a lot of freedom. So I was following the work on elementary particle physics. In those days, the great name was Gell-Mann, and his recent discovery at that time was the so-called SU3 symmetry. So because of my group theory interest, I started thinking and reading about SU3. So I did some work on the algebraic side. Then with Sudarshan and Alan McFarlane, wrote a couple of papers on selection rules for particle decays, multiplet theory, and so on. And when Gell-Mann suggested SU3 as a higher symmetry, the physics community realized this is a big difference compared to what we normally used to learn in quantum theory, the quantum theory of angular momentum. So from the group theory point of view, most physicists were familiar with what is called the SU2 group. What Gell-Mann had introduced was one level higher, SU3. And then it turned out, the mathematicians pointed out, or the people with mathematical background, SU3 is one of three groups of a certain kind, so-called rank 2 groups. They're one step more complicated than SU2. So one of the other rank 2 groups, apart from Gell-Mann's SU3, was a group called G2. It is called an exceptional group. So I think it was Sudarshan's suggestion, let's try G2 as an alternative to SU3. And so I did a lot of work on representation theory of G2. but it didn't survive as a symmetry group. Very quickly, in 2 years, 1 year, 2 years, it was clear that SU3 is the new symmetry. But for my own thesis, I did a lot of work on representation theory and applications of this exceptional group G2. Well, it didn't survive in the subject. And then I did some part of my thesis was on Hamiltonian theories of relativistic particle, a combination of things, quantum mechanics, canonical mechanics, in a framework which had been set up by Dirac in 1949, that forms of relativistic dynamics. That is something that Sudarshan and his earlier students had worked with quite a lot, so I got drawn into that.
And after PhD, where did you move?
After PhD, that was in 1964, I got a research associate position at Princeton.
That was quite quick. You started working full time with him in 62 and by 64 you finished.
Yeah, just under 2 years. But the total period spent in Rochester was about 3.5 years. 61 January.
That's also so short by American PhDs.
Yeah. January 61 till April, May 64. So in 64, July, August, we moved to Princeton. I got a research associate position to work with Professor Goldberger, a very famous name in the theory of dispersion relations. So I moved there, I spent 2 years there, and then I was all this period I was on leave of absence from TIFR Bombay.
I was going to ask that what was so the connection with TIFR remained.
But there also there is an interesting thing. Remember, I keep referring to my fellow students, people like Rajashekaran. He went to Chicago soon after I went to Rochester, a few months later. He also was on leave of absence from TIFR. But for various reasons, remember, I had retained my position under atomic energy establishment. When Ramana got me the permission to go to Rochester, he advised me, do not ask for your salary during your absence. He advised me, he said, because you preserve your freedom. So throughout my stay in Rochester, I was not drawing any salary from atomic energy establishment in India, but my position was protected. Junior scientific officer, atomic energy establishment. In Rajashekaran's case, as an example, when he went to Chicago, he was given his salary within TIFR throughout his absence. So this had a consequence. When he finished his PhD in 64, I think, he felt a sense of loyalty to TIFR and he immediately came away back to Bombay. He did not go after PhD for any postdoctoral thing.
So that means Ramana's advice was a wise advice, that you should kind of not give up your freedom to do a postdoc and move on.
Exactly, but your position was protected. So after Rochester, I went to Princeton for 2 years, and then I went to Syracuse for about 1.25 years, and late 67 I came back.
And how did you get connected with optics? Because even in your early career, you have some papers which are not in particle physics.
Yeah, because of the contact with Emil Wolf, my first summer, 61 summer, he gave me a summer project to look at some problem about consistency of Raleigh's diffraction formulas in wave theory. It was a small problem, but he was so helpful. I produced a solution to answer his questions, and he helped me to get it published in the JOSA. And it is like a medieval thing. In the JOSA paper, if you see in print today, the diagrams in the article are the ones drawn by hand by me on the manuscript which is submitted, and they are there with that handwriting. So now that would never happen. So that contact with optics was there, and very soon after I had started working in particle physics for PhD, Sudarshan did his great work in quantum optics, the discovery of the diagonal representation. in January 1963.
You were right there at that
I
time.
was there, and in his paper in Physical Review Letters, he thanks Chandralal Mehta and me for useful discussions. Not that we contributed much, but so that link was there, and that interest in optics as a subject continued. So a few years later, I remember Tom Jordan and I, Jordan was Sudarshan's earlier student. Jordan and I collaborated quite a bit. We did a little piece of work in optics, coherence function, properties of light, etc., which Professor Chaturvedi mentioned in some conversation today, that he and Agarwal used what we had done. So that kind of link was there. So it was basically because of Sudarshan's involvement with the diagonal representation. Then slowly I got drawn into this quantum optics area, and that's how but always my focus was on exploiting group theoretical and symmetry ideas in optics. Whatever problem, my bias is towards the symmetry and group analysis.
So when you came back to TIFR in 67, so had TIFR changed a lot in this period and developed and so on?
The whole Colaba campus was fully completed. Sadly, Baba had died in 1966 January. So I came back end of 67. So the entire TIFR faculty, all groups, all experimental, theoretical, were all housed in Colaba. And many of them were known to me from the period before I went to Rochester. Some names I can mention to you. Professor Pandit was already there. He had been one of my mentors in my student period in TIFR. Then a very well-known plasma physicist, R.K. Verma, who was at one time PRL director. I had known him in Bombay before going to Rochester. He was there. And Bansal had already come to Chandigarh, I think. But I knew many people there.
And you continued, I mean, then was there any demand from TIFR that after coming back what you should do and so on? And they must have changed your status, they must have made you a faculty by then?
Not faculty, I was given the title of a position of fellow. Okay. Fellow. Now I can't remember now from where my salary was coming by that time, whether it was from TIFR, but I remember I had lot of formal links with the atomic energy establishment for official purposes. But from practical point of view, the relationship between the two bodies was so fluid, so free of rules and bureaucracy because of Bhaba's personality. The movement between atomic energy establishment and TIFR, it was very, very easy. But slowly and naturally, things became a little more codified. So at some point, I think I transferred fully to TIFR. But I was not told this is the kind of work you should do or anything like that. Because I had a few publications by that time, and my interests were in this way, you know, group theory related, symmetry related, somewhat more mathematical. So my collaborations were also not that strong within TIFR. I often think to myself, around me I could see Rajashekharan, KVL Sharma, Virendra Gupta, all these people had very good strong collaborations going. Some of Rajashekharan's finest work was done with KVL Sharma at the time of the neutral current discoveries. And the other great work that he did in TIFR was with Prabir Roy. So in retrospect, I feel I should have also tried to collaborate with others, but it didn't happen because of the nature of my interests. So I was in that sense a little bit lonely, but I was under no pressure what kind of problem I should.
And how did this transition from Bombay to Bangalore happen, and when did it happen? And
I suppose, see, this is more than 50 years ago now. I think this feeling of not being part of a slightly larger collaborative group must have had a subconscious influence on me. There was a feeling that I need to go somewhere. around that time, an event happened in Indian science which has been written about quite often. Three people, Professor Dhawan, director of the IISc Bangalore, Professor D.S. Kothari, chairman of the University Grants Commission, and E.C.G. Sudarshan, who was by that time in Austin, Texas. They made a plan for Sudarshan to establish a new center within IISc Bangalore, the Center for Theoretical Studies. It was supposed to be a place where you could do theoretical physics, theoretical biology, general anything, fluid dynamics, monsoon dynamics, meteorology, anything with a significant mathematical content. It was supposed to be a place where all of these would be fostered. It was not physics alone. And so that was created in the institute through the efforts of these three people, with the director position for Sudarshan, and that was started in July 1972. And later that year I got an invitation from Professor Dhawan to join as a faculty member in this new center. And the relationship between Professor Dhawan, director of IISc, and Professor M.G.K. Menon, director of TIFR, was so close, so cordial, I benefited. Menon was happy to give it permission to go, and Dhawan, it was arranged between them that I could go. So that's how I came to Bangalore, end of 1972.
And then of course you remained in Bangalore.
I remained till I retired.
Once you also told me that Punjab University Chandigarh offered you a position to come here. Which year was it and how did that happen?
I tell you, when I was in TIFR, in 1970 summer, the UGC organized, supported an advanced summer school in theoretical physics at Punjab University Chandigarh. The chairman of the department at that time was Professor Harnam Singh Hans, H.S. Hans. And the person running this UGC school was Professor R.K. Bansal, who had been my senior by a year or two at Rochester. Before that I had known him through the training school. He had been one of our tutors, I think. So I was invited to come and give a course of lectures on elementary particles and their symmetry at this school in Chandigarh, Punjab University. So I came here at that time. It was a peak of summer. I even remember getting a sunstroke one day, because in those days I did not use the umbrella. But anyway, that was my exposure to this place, and somehow Professor Hans felt I should come and join them. So he did write to me, but he picked up this idea maybe 2 years, 1.5 years after my visit here. That was summer 1970. Sometime late 71, something like that, early 72, he wrote to me, would you consider moving from TIFR to this place? By that time, this idea of this new center in Bangalore was already moving. Of course, it took some time to go through the formal processes, but for me, remembering my parents living in Bangalore, it was much more natural. So
how did you see the change or the contrast, because IISc Bangalore was a much older institution, had its roots in with so many disciplines and having a very broad picture compared to TIFR. So how did you find the difference between the two institutions?
Yeah, initially I must say that I used to feel a lot of frustration with the administrative procedures within IISc Bangalore, compared to TIFR, where things seemed so much more accessible. If you had any problem on the administrative side, you could immediately go and talk to the dean, Professor Daniel, or you could talk to the registrar, Mr. Putran, and things could be sorted out. Within IISc, as you said, it was a much older system. They had rules and procedures which I was not aware of. So initially there was a little bit of difficulty for me, but as time progressed, I noticed in my own experience a great difference between the two, TIFR and IISc at that time. IISc, I found, was like an institution in principle accessible to everyone in the country within the university system. There was a constant stream of visitors from various universities passing through IISc. It had many more departments, 30-40 departments, and there was a constant movement of people. So it was very much in contact with the scientific community in the country in all subjects. In contrast, TIFR was at that time somewhat insulated. There were not that many people visiting TIFR from the universities of the country. Of course, there are logistical problems. It was a small campus in Colaba, and they didn't have the facilities to host many people. But I would put it this way: the first time that the UGC supported a summer school in TIFR was when I was there in 1972, and Professor D.S. Kothari asked TIFR to run an advanced summer school in quantum mechanics, summer school in advanced quantum mechanics, national level. And Udgaonkar asked me to run it. That was the first time such a thing happened in TIFR. In the institute in Bangalore, there were so many programs, faculty improvement of this kind, of that kind, supported by UGC, supported by Education Ministry, and the IISc was the vehicle for that. So in that sense, I felt IISc was very much in touch with the research and teaching scientific community of the country as a whole, much more than TIFR at that time. So that's a contrast.
So who were the other physicists in IISc whom you then interacted with and so on? In the physics department must be having a large number of...
There were many. Sadly, many of them are no more. But I remember so many names. One was Professor K.P. Sinha.
He was also in the CTS, I suppose.
He was professor in physics, and he was one of the founders of the CTS.
You also had a position in physics.
I got a position many years later. I was invited to be a professor sometime in 1979 or something. I don't remember. Many years after I was in CTS. But I used to teach very regularly. But within physics department, Professor Vishwamitra, Professor Venkat Subramaniam, the geophysics person, Professor Suryan, who was the PhD guide of Dr. R. Chidambaram, then Professor E.S. Rajagopal, Professor P.S. Narayanan. I knew all these people. The ESR person, Professor R. Srinivasan, all of them. I knew all of them. The relationship was very close. Though I was not a faculty member in physics until I think 1979 or so. Just as I was going away for my one and only sabbatical from the institute, I was invited to be faculty in physics. So that's how it happened. But after I adjusted to the slower administrative pace, I felt at home.
But you also had a role in development of CTS and so on, I suppose, because you were the early part of it. And
yeah, I had not anticipated it, but it turned out that the plan that Sudarshan had was he would be director of the Center for Theoretical Studies, spending roughly 2.5 months of the year in Bangalore. Rest of the time he would be in Austin, Texas, which was his main base. And he made me the chairman of the Center for Theoretical Studies, which was not something I had anticipated. So I had to learn. Sinha became chairman of the division of physics and mathematics. The divisional system was just introduced in 72-73 by Dhawan, because he had taken on the role of ISRO, chief of ISRO. So he streamlined the IISc administration so that he could delegate responsibilities. So that's when the divisional structure within IISc was started. Sinha became divisional chairman and they made me CTS chairman.
So because of this broader structure, people like Rodam Narasimha and were associated with CTS, I suppose. And there were others also, I suppose, biologists, and I think what's his name? Sharat Chandra was associated.
As I said, the CTS was not a physics center by any means. It was supposed to house many disciplines with a theory interest. So Sharat Chandra was human genetics, one of the leading human geneticists of the country. He had theoretical interests as well. So he was in the microbiology and cell biology laboratory as a professor and a professor in this CTS. Then Professor Narasimha was professor in aeronautical engineering and in CTS. And the third great name is Professor Madhav Gadgil and then Sulochana Gadgil. They joined CTS a few months after me, and they started, one of them started ecological sciences and the other started meteorological sciences.
So they also started in CTS?
Yes, fluid dynamics.
The current director, who is a mathematician, also started in CTS, I'm told?
He joined the physics department, mathematics department as a faculty member when I was still in the institute, but initially he had a joint position in the CTS. Yeah.
So maybe this conversation we will kind of close somewhere here, but I have a couple of closing questions. So one was, in the beginning you mentioned that your father gave you 3 options, and clearly you chose one. So what was his reaction to your choice?
See, these are somewhat personal matters.
You cannot answer, but what did you feel? Maybe he gave you the options, you chose one, because you didn't go outside.
Option of this possibility of joining the Atomic Energy Training School was very unlikely, because I was not a physics graduate, but I had applied for physics stream. That's the only one I could apply for. So there wasn't much hope that I would get it. So the other options he had suggested was study law, or go for IAS, or go for more mathematics again. Then this suddenly came as a new option. So he accepted it. It would mean that I would move away from Delhi, move to Bombay, whereas he continued. He was working in UGC at that time, and he was very close to Dr. Kothari on the administrative side. So all these links were there. He let me go.
And my second question is that, I mean, if you rerun things, so would you like it to unfold very differently, or you think that this is what it was and this is how it should have happened?
No, what is it that I have missed? If I had had a little more firm guidance from Sudarshan as a PhD student, giving me concrete help, let us try to do such and such a problem, it would have been to my advantage. He left it very much free to me. I have written many papers with him, but sad to say, to my what shall I say, misfortune, that's a very strong word, I have not worked with him in any of the areas in which he is very famous. Weak interactions, no, that was over by the time I joined him. Quantum optics, no, he had done the diagonal representation. He did not pursue the consequences of it as vigorously as he could have. Mehta worked closely with him in the optics thing. Then the next great thing he did was the Zeno paradox. I am being very honest with you. I had no role to play. Everybody says I am the one who was closest to him. I have written maybe 50 papers with him, but I had nothing to do with the Zeno paradox. I had nothing to do with the quantum mechanics of open systems. None of these things did I get an opportunity to collaborate. I collaborated with him on many things, but these are the ones which he is very famous for. So I can call it my regret. I wish I had had an opportunity to work with him in one or other of those areas. But at the end of the day, I have done what I have done, and that's good enough. After all, I have guided Simon, Samuel, and you, and I see where each of you has gone. I am very happy.
So I think we'll close this conversation. Thank you, Professor Mukunda. So this was the first in the series where we wanted to know the personal trajectory of Professor Mukunda. In subsequent conversations over the coming days, we will talk about his views on physics and science education and how things have been happening in this country. So we will close this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.